Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the latest in our series of leadership masterclasses, sponsored by Rathbones. My name is Kirsty Maxey. I'm the chair of the IoD City Financial Services Interest Group and CEO of Team Spirit. We're very excited to have Anneliese Dodds, MP, Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, with us this evening. But before we meet her, there's just a few bits of housekeeping. Firstly, here's the agenda for this evening, and there are two ways that everyone can interact with us tonight. Both of them are at the bottom of your screen. So firstly, you'll see the chat button. To do this, use this if you're dialing in and want to share your details with other attendees. So that's an opportunity to share where you're dialing in from and share any LinkedIn posts, etc. And secondly, you can also comment in there as well with other attendees. If you want to ask questions of Anneliese this evening, you can also do that, but that's in the Q&A button. The great thing about the Q&A button is that you can update questions and upvote them. So if you really want to see a particular question answered this evening, please make sure that you click on it and so it'll rank higher. And finally, just to let you know that this webinar is being recorded. This event is part of the IoD Business Extra webinar series, which is providing insight and networking opportunities for our members, particularly through this very challenging time. Now I'd like to introduce you to our sponsor of the Leadership Masterclass series, Emma Watson, who is Head of Financial Planning at Rathbones. Rathbones are the wealth management service for entrepreneurs, private clients and professional partners. Emma is responsible for delivering Rathbones' financial planning service for clients and has a team of planners based all across the UK. Welcome, Emma, and over to you.
Thank you, Kirsty. Good evening, everybody. I am delighted to be part of Rathbones' sponsorship of these speaker events. Well done to the team for putting together such an interesting run of speakers throughout this year. As Kirsty said, at Rathbones, I head up the financial planning teams. So for me to be introducing the Shadow Chancellor, Anneliese Dodds, in the week before the budget is really something special. This year is my 25th year in financial services, so this is about my 30th budget. I'm one of the people in the team who tend to read the longer document that comes out after the Chancellor has spoken. Last year it ran to 136 pages. Who knows how long it'll be this year? But budget day for anybody who works in our industry is a big day. It's a big occasion. It's usually a long day as well. It's unprecedented what a relatively new Chancellor will face this year. The damage that COVID has already done to the economy, to society as a whole, particularly to young and vulnerable people, must be repaired and has to be paid for. I think I asked for a show of hands this evening for how many of you believe there won't be a tax rise in the budget. I wouldn't be looking at many, if any, hands. In fact, the Office of Tax Simplification have put out a report looking at reforming capital gains tax. So that shows perhaps some direction of thinking of the government. And of course, there's been widespread media coverage about a potential wealth tax. So what does this mean for someone like me whose work with clients often includes tax planning? Well, actually, it doesn't really matter what's in the budget. The heart of what we do doesn't really change, which is that we work with clients, we understand them, their priorities, and we help them to balance their responsibilities. And at Rathbones, responsibility is something that we talk about a lot. So each of us as individuals has many, many different responsibilities. We have responsibilities to ourselves, also to our families, but also to our wider community and society. How we think and act now as individuals, as companies, as a society is hugely important because it will have implications for decades to come. Whether we get it right or we get it wrong, this is a hugely important budget on the 3rd of March. Many of our clients at Rathbones, in fact, many of our employees, come to us and stay with us because of our values. And they'll well understand the need that we need to balance what's the responsible approach for an individual and also the needs of the wider communities in which we live. To achieve its objective, any tax needs to be set at the right level to be effective. If it's too low, it doesn't raise the amount of money we need. If it's too high, it encourages people to avoid it. So this budget really is pivotal, and our speaker tonight could not be more timely. So I will not delay it any further, and I will hand over to Alistair King. Thank you very much. Alistair is the chair of the Institute of Directors, City of London. Over to you, Alistair.
Thank you, Emma. What a great pleasure it is to be with you all tonight. Thank you very much indeed for making time to join us this evening. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome Anneliese Dodds, MP. Anneliese, thank you very much indeed for coming on board tonight.
Well, it's a tremendous pleasure for me to be with you all tonight. I've been seeing in the chat box all the different parts of the country that you're from, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion. And thanks very much to Emma for that lovely introduction as well.
And it's a particular joy to be talking to another Aberdonian, Anneliese. I'm sorry, I don't have much of an accent, but I did spend much of my childhood up there. It's a fantastic part of the world, and it's great to have you here. I think that rather than me try and introduce you, what I thought I'd do, why don't I ask you to introduce yourself? If you could say a little bit about your background, a little bit about what you've done, and how did you end up in the Shadow Cabinet?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much indeed, Alistair. So, as you say, I'm originally from the northeast of Scotland, actually from Aberdeenshire, so very much the countryside, a Exchequer as we would be called up there. And then I moved down south to attend university, in fact, in the city where I'm talking to you from now, Oxford. And for really a very long time, I combined, I suppose, political activism and engagement in my party, in the Labour Party, with an academic career. So I studied in Edinburgh and London, worked at a number of different universities on a range of different subjects, always in the social sciences, but on economic policy, regulatory policy, health policy as well. And then eventually I ended up working at Aston University, where I was particularly focused on comparative public policy. So how, for example, economic policy is organised in different countries, how health policy is organised in different countries, that kind of thing. I also chaired a debt and welfare advice centre on the council estate where I live, where I'm speaking to you from. So I suppose quite a bit of experience of personal financial issues. And also that was something that's kind of important to me because my father was an accountant, ran his own small business, and in fact was a director of not just that business, but of a number of other ones that he tried to set up. Not all of them always went as well as he wanted, but very much have that experience, I suppose, of business from my own upbringing. So yeah, really, really good to be with you all tonight.
Thank you, Anneliese. Can you just give us a few minutes on just where you see what the current state of the economy is like at the moment? Just your overall impression.
Yes, well, we've always heard that word unprecedented during this crisis, but of course it's true because we've never been in a situation before where government, or at least not in living memory, generally, where governments had to actually shut down economic activity for public health reasons. I mean, clearly every country has had a very severe economic hit during this crisis. I am concerned, however, that some of the statistics indicate that the UK's crisis has been particularly deep in comparative perspective, at least in relation to all the other G7 nations. So it's very important that we do all we can now to preserve jobs, recover jobs, get those new jobs created for the future and build up business confidence and I would say families' confidence in their finances as well. We really are at a very important point where we're all hoping that the improving public health situation should lead to that economic growth, but we need to see the right economic decisions being taken to buttress that as well so that we can emerge from this really very difficult situation for business.
It's lovely. We are particularly grateful to you for coming to speak with us today, particularly given that you've got the most enormous amount of work going on currently in preparation for the budget on the 3rd of March. So we're thrilled that you could be with us. Before we get on to perhaps some of the more policy element or political elements of the discussion, can we just get some Brexit out of the way? I think that the some of the predictions that we saw in relation to lorries being parked up and blocking all the motorways in Kent, etc., they haven't really come to pass. There's been some issues, obviously, that we've read about and seen on our televisions. What's your impression? Are these teething problems, or is there a real sort of a real problem there that needs to be addressed?
I think that's a very important question, and actually I think there are perhaps three different categories of problems that businesses are facing. There are those associated with genuine teething issues. So where, for example, there's not been clear communication around certain aspects of the new situation, or it's just a question of working out the right way through new guidelines. So that would be the first bucket of issues, which we all hope will be resolved. Secondly, I would say there are those matters where we don't know currently exactly what the situation will be. Of course, that's the case for financial services. It's also the case for those different services that rely on data adequacy. And then also finally on those that rely on having a very, very quick transfer through ports, where we do still have that new customs arrangement that will be coming through in the summer. And then I would say there's a third bucket of problems where, unfortunately, we haven't got, it appears, at least at the moment, the prospect of a different situation coming through, and where there is arguably a chilling impact on some forms of business activity. I don't think that is responsible for all of the changes that we've seen. I mean, we've clearly had, obviously stockpiling before Christmas, and then a number of businesses holding off on some of their activities until we get to a clearer situation, particularly around the ports. But I am concerned that there are some activities that really are becoming very, very difficult indeed. I mean, I was talking to, for example, some hauliers involved in supporting the music industry. Now, obviously, there's the impact of COVID on top of them as well, but some of the new restrictions that are being applied essentially are attacking their whole business model. And that's in a case for a sector which is actually quite successful for the UK economy.
Excellent. And a related question that I think is very germane to so many of the audience here, given that this is an IoD City of London event, and that is financial services. Can you foresee that there's going to be a EU UK free trade agreement that will cover financial services during the life of this Parliament, or do you think that's a long shot?
Well, again, I mean, a really interesting question. I mean, of course, we've been told that with the memorandum of understanding, certainly the opposition's been told that we won't be provided with a running commentary on it. I mean, I suppose that's fair enough, given it's a negotiation, but certainly we want to see very strong ambitions for that memorandum. And then going forward, I mean, we've clearly had the admission by the UK side that we had to offer equivalence broadly. I would say, I was a member of the European Parliament before I came into the Westminster Parliament. And I remember when all these discussions started, when we were aiming at having passporting, we then shifted into definitely having equivalence. Now we've got kind of one-sided approach and really hoping that we might be reciprocated. We shifted quite a long way down that spectrum, I would say, and I am concerned about the long-term impact. I'm very proud of our financial and related professional services. They support 1 in every 14 jobs in the UK. So we do need to do all that we can really to make sure that trade is still moving. And I would say, other things we can do as well to support the sector around industrial policy, skills policy, and making sure that we have those jobs for the future that are so necessary.
It's interesting what you say on that. And I'm sure there'll be some people coming up with a Q&A shortly on that front. But I think one of the impacts that we've seen with COVID, perhaps if I can move on to that, is real problems in the high street. And one of the questions that I've asked all of my guests in this interview series is, do you have any particular remedies to solve this great problem that we see in the centre of all of our cities? Just to give you an example, and that is, we had one of the guests on previously, James Timpson from the Timpsons, the shoe repair people, who has 2,150 outlets throughout the country. So he sees exactly what's happening to the right in the centre of these towns. And he was saying that it's a real problem. And he gave a couple of examples as to sort of practical steps that local authorities could take in order to try to revitalise. I just wondered, do you have some ideas along those lines, Anneliese?
Yes, absolutely. And I think this is very important because actually you get to a certain stage, kind of tipping point, when it becomes harder to build that economic activity back up again. I understand the FSB has done some interesting research into this, looking particularly at towns and how if you see a certain number of businesses moving out, it's really hard to pull that activity back in again. And ultimately, there is obviously a strong negative employment impact from that, an impact I would say on innovation as well in the longer term, because we need to have that diversity of economic activity. So I am concerned about this. I do think there are a number of things actually that can be done. First of all, in the short term, I think obviously many of those different businesses have been heavily reliant on the different grant schemes, and we've been calling for more clarity around them. And we've got a bit of a suggestion that there would be some more of that coming soon from the Prime Minister today. Well, we really think that that's extremely urgent now. Relatedly, we really want to see clarity that the business rates holiday will be continued for at least 6 months for hospitality and tourism, etc. related activities. Also that we'll have that reduction in VAT going on for at least 3 months after the end of restrictions. We think that's important. In the longer term, though, we do need to grapple, I think, with the taxation problems that I'm sure many people listening to this will be well aware of. I mean, the disincentive impacts of business rates, obviously sunk cost, really weighing that prospect of it, really weighing on a lot of high street businesses now, compared to the situation with other forms of taxation that obviously vary more with profit. That is an issue, I think, and it is creating a lot of issues for the future. But then just really finally, and I'm going to be saying a bit more about this later on in the week, I think there are many changes occurring in the planning system as well, which, unless we get them right, they could accelerate some of those shifts of commercial activity out of our town and city centres. And I think that would be very negative for us into the future.
Thank you. I mean, a related point is the whole idea of of working from home. And that's obviously sent a whole load of people who were coming into the centre of towns out to the outskirts. I just wondered, some people have thought it's a good thing, some people see it as a bad thing. But is there a concept that if people can work from home, in the suburbs, can those people also work, or their jobs be translated through to the Philippines and Vietnam and China, etc.? And I just wondered, do you see real problems coming along the track in relation to working from home, or do you think it's a more sustainable business model?
I think that's a fascinating question, and I think the answer has to be that it will very much depend on the sector, and it will very much depend on, indeed, many issues related to the quality of work, the nature of work, and indeed often how it's regulated as well. I think we had a very interesting judgment, as people will have been aware, a few days ago around the nature of self-employment and whether that's genuinely representative of people's status or otherwise. I mean, I would say that I think the impact of this has been very kind of highly differentiated, hasn't it? So first of all, we've seen some of those local economic centres doing relatively all right during this period, whereas the big city centres, London, Glasgow, Belfast, really suffering, Birmingham as well because of this. But then also, of course, we've got a huge gulf in the labour market between those who can work from home and those who've had to go into work and then had all those issues around, whether they're able to self-isolate and all this kind of thing layered on top. So I think a huge amount raised by these questions that we will need to think through and make sure that we're facing up to for the future.
Excellent. And then one further point in relation to the labour market, Anneliese, is that of the skills shortage that a lot of our members see, particularly when it comes to things like advanced coding and these types of things. Part of our scope, our remit within the IoD City of London is the Shoreditch Tech Cluster. And I think there is huge sort of problems there about getting the right people in there. What's your view in relation to the new points-based immigration system? Do you think that's going to work, or is there a better way of doing it?
Well, we do have some concerns about that new system. We are concerned about its impact around ensuring that we can genuinely have access to the workforce that we need. I mean, very obviously, there's been a very vigorous debate around certain professions like social care, where we would say that actually there needs to be a much stronger career path for those going into social care. There does need to be more robust pay within that sector, but where we also need to make sure that we've got access to those who can work in it in the first place. And I would say allied to this, I think there's a broader question, obviously, than around just the immigration system. There is that major issue about whether we see our young people coming forward with the right skills. I mean, as I said before, I'm talking to you from Oxford. Now, I see a situation where we've got, two excellent universities, some of the most groundbreaking research taking place in the whole world, and yet we have young people coming out of school who have very low levels of facility, even with basic mathematics, actually, in this city. And yet, we can't get enough lab technicians a lot of the time. So we really do need to be looking at our domestic workforce as well, and what we can do to push up standards. And Kate Green, our new Shadow Education Secretary, I know she's very strongly committed to doing that.
That's interesting. And again, following on the tech side, one of the IoD's policies over recent months effectively has been calling for a good deal of investment into broadband rollout and high-speed broadband, et cetera. And that's in order to assist the regional support hubs and these types of things, particularly linked into some of the universities, et cetera. Given what you've just said about where you're talking from, et cetera, do you think that's a decent, sensible policy idea that the government should take on?
Yes, I think we do need to have much more of a focus around broadband capability. I think that the issues around coverage have really been brought home to everyone during this period, not just in terms of working from home, but of course for children in terms of learning from home as well. And it is very obvious that we don't have the system that we need. We do think that actually there are many regulatory questions that need to be sorted out around this. Chion Wura, who's our shadow minister, who's been focused on this, I think has been quite clear that we do need to have a much stronger plan around this, particularly around ensuring that we get gigabit broadband if we can. I mean, we've got kind of commitment to gigabit capable now, which seems to be a little bit of a step backwards from where we were before. So we think, let's be ambitious about this. Let's make sure that we are investing now for the future so that we really can get the employment capabilities out of it, as well as making sure that, for example, our children are able to learn in the way that they need to be. Yeah.
And following on from the educational element, I mean, one of the things, or one of the part of the educational system that I think a lot of our members come across is that of apprentices. And we'll want to talk a little bit about the apprenticeship levy. Is there scope for broadening the apprenticeship levy? Perhaps also expand that into digital management and leadership training opportunities. Is there a scope for that? Do you think the government should be doing more along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, we really do want to see a much more creative approach to the apprentice levy. I mean, actually, when you look at the system overall, very large amounts of that levy have not actually been spent, so it's not designed currently in the way that it should be, we would argue. And very often I talk to firms which want to have really good quality apprenticeship schemes. They're not able to deliver it via that levy system. We do think that there's a strong need for reform, and we think we've got to face up to some of what's been happening in apprenticeships over recent years. I mean, we've actually seen the number of disadvantaged young people in particular going into apprenticeships reducing over time. Now, that really shouldn't be the case. Obviously, we've got some new measures that have been brought in during this COVID period, but we need to be making sure that we massively ramp that up into the future so that we do have also that more genuine parity of esteem that, again, politicians have often called for over recent years, but that we've not seen delivered. And, apprenticeships are going to be core to that.
Lovely, thank you. Just to remind viewers, this is me, Alistair King. I have the great pleasure of interviewing Anneliese Dodds, MP, Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, in the IoD Leadership Masterclass series. This series is very kindly sponsored by Rathbones. Anneliese, just want to, another one of the IoD policies, which if I could just read it out to you, which would love to sort of get your view on it. And that is, there is a desire among the IoD to encourage wider investment by creating a new temporary digital and green recovery credit to support spending in technology, i.e. software, data, IT, carbon reduction and retraining, and extending the £1 million annual investment allowance cap into 2021. What do you think about this idea of the digital and green recovery credit? Does that have legs?
I mean, it is a very interesting idea, and I'd certainly be interested in looking at more details from yourselves about exactly how that might operate. I think I suppose the only point we'd want to add to this discussion is that obviously we need to see the stimulation of that kind of investment in individual firms and individual businesses, but we'd also want to make sure that we're looking at this from a sectoral point of view as well, and ensuring that we have those enabling technologies really available across the piece, and more of an overall strategy for them. Of course, we have had the industrial strategy in place, but we've not always seen, we would argue, those kind of green and digital imperatives hardwired into every one of the sector deals to the extent that it needs to be. And we also haven't seen, for example, a sector deal for financial services, something that I've asked for really for a long time. So I think we do need to have that, I suppose, that broader perspective on these questions. You know, we are interested now in looking into what could be used to stimulate investment into the future. So please ping me on the details so that I can have a look at it. But let's think about the, I suppose, the broader infrastructure around this too.
Excellent. And I think, again, a related point is that of COVID recovery, and how do we push that forward. And one of the other IoD proposals is to extend the existing COVID-19 economic support measures, such as restrictions and the support for those directors who've missed out on other schemes. And I think that some people have slipped through the net. I'm sure there are people in your post bag back in your constituency who have slipped through the net. I mean, is there a case even at this stage, late stage perhaps, of trying to help those people, or do you think that's something that is just going to be impossible given the circumstance?
I think there is a case actually for improving the scope of the existing schemes. And if I'm completely honest, I have found this slightly frustrating really over the months. I think all of us completely understood that at the beginning of the crisis, there was a scramble to get the different support schemes put into place. But after we'd had the first iterations of the furlough scheme and of the SEISS, you know, we did feel it could have been possible, and still is possible, to amend a number of those schemes. I mean, if you look, for example, at the SEISS, you could be seeing now that it could be based on the 2019 to 20 tax return. So those who were newly self-employed could be covered by it. We don't feel that arguments that these kinds of changes would involve, you know, fraudulent behaviour hold water. Actually, we don't agree with that. In many cases, it would be possible to design schemes that would be helping people in these circumstances. And I think we're concerned really about the impact of, I would say, a failure, to be honest, to cover these different groups. We're concerned about the impact of that on our ability to recover, because very often in the past, it's been exactly those groups, you know, self-employed people, those with kind of quite complex employment statuses, who've actually helped to drive recovery. You know, we found that after the 2008-9 financial crisis, that, you know, there's a lot of self-employed people, for example, and people setting up those kinds of arrangements into the future help to drive our recovery. And if they feel that they'll be, I suppose, not protected, that it's too risky for the future, then that could potentially be really quite bad for the next 5 to 10 years of our economic development.
Interesting. Anneliese, would you increase the budgets for perhaps of the DIT and BEIS, the business related departments, in order to almost sort of allow business, or to encourage businesses to make more advantage or take more advantage of the free trade agreements, both existing and future? Would that be a sort of sensible route forward as well?
Yeah, I mean, I know that Emily Thornbury, who's our shadow trade secretary, she's been looking into this in a lot of detail. And I think the first thing that we would want to do would be to make sure that actually the existing systems are working as effectively as they possibly can be. I mean, we would argue, for example, that there seems to be often a disconnect between the work that Department of International Trade staff are doing around the world to identify new export opportunities, new investment opportunities, and then the support that is available through UK export finance. So the two systems often don't seem to be really kind of talking to each other, working with each other. There's been suggestions of some kind of a memo of understanding that doesn't seem to have moved forward particularly. I think we're also concerned that quite often firms might be, for example, going to international trade shows or expos, but then there's not always the promotion that companies would anticipate coming from the centre, that we seem to have sometimes for businesses from other countries that we'd expect to have from our own. And then also we would say there seems to be quite big regional gaps in how this works. So, particularly those businesses, I mean, not every business obviously needs that help, but often in London and South East, there seems to be more available help than if we're looking to the rest of the country. So, we wouldn't necessarily say that, if there's a proven need for additional funding, that shouldn't come on stream, but we would say, let's make the existing systems work more effectively for businesses, and hopefully that would give us a bit of a fill up in that regard.
And this one, though, Anneliese, may be the $64 million question or whatever it is, and I don't want you to sort of you may be storing up your powder for a response to the budget on the 3rd of March. But is there a case for putting off major tax rises at this time, given the recovery that we're hopefully going into fairly shortly?
Yes, I mean, I certainly won't pull my punches on this question, because I think actually some of the existing, not just discussions and rumours, but actually actions as well, in my view, have not been helpful. So, of course, we're seeing already an increase in council tax, so 5% budgeted for increasing council tax that's taking place, and very obviously that does have quite a big impact on family finances. But we have seen a lot of rumours around other tax changes that might be introduced at this budget, and we don't think it's the right time to be putting those tax changes into place right now. We think the focus should be on protecting jobs, creating new jobs, supporting their creation for the future, really giving businesses and families that confidence to be investing, to be spending. So we don't think now's the time. We do think there should be longer term reform to the tax system, but that shouldn't be the focus right now, while we're right in the middle of this very, very intense both pandemic and, of course, economic crisis as well. And
whilst we're on the tax system, the idea of what about this of scrapping of duty-free for tourists and visitors to the UK? I mean, that's something that's, again, potentially causing an awful lot of angst in the already beleaguered travel industry, and also the idea of a fair amount of potential job losses there. Is that something that would be on a Labour Party agenda?
I mean, we have been concerned about this change. I mean, we appreciate that there was the position that's come from the World Trade Organization, which has relevance to this situation. But we've had 4 years ultimately to prepare for this eventuality. And we are concerned that there doesn't seem to have been robust modelling of the impact of this on jobs. Obviously, it have a very concentrated impact in certain facilities that are especially targeted towards the tourism market. So, we do feel, okay, it may well be the case that there needs to be change here, but please, we should have it as planned change, one which is properly thought through, also in terms of its impact on employment, and not what feels like really a very big change, and one which is quite last minute.
Okay. A slightly related point, and that is, again, if I could read you an IoD policy proposal, and that is the idea of boost funding for scale-ups and startups by easing restrictions on the government's seed enterprise investment scheme and enterprise investment scheme, doubling the maximum capacity investment threshold in the former. Would that sort of thing would sit well within a Labour Party manifesto?
Well, actually, I think we're both pushing in the same direction. That certainly we do think there needs to be more support available for people to start their own business. No question about that. And, we'd be really interested in looking carefully at the Institute's proposals in that regard. We set out last week, I suppose, a kind of complementary approach, actually, which was around really substantially scaling up the startup loans scheme and trying to make sure that had better geographical coverage, but a number of other changes as well that we hoped would draw more individuals into setting up their own business and hopefully make sure that they're more successful when they start off as well. So I think certainly that outcome of wanting to ensure that we have greater support for nascent businesses and really get them firing on all 4 cylinders, get them employing new people. That's definitely one that we share. And then the mechanisms for getting there, I think we, let's have that discussion. But certainly, as I say, a few days ago, Keir set out this proposal from us to at least, increase that startup loan availability. We think that would help quite a bit.
And then perhaps slightly cheekily, Anneliese, I think Sir Keir Starmer's recommendations the other day, they didn't really make the sort of impact that perhaps some people were hoping they would. I mean, people aren't really talking about them, as I'm sure that Sir Keir would rather hope that they were. And I just wondered, why is that? Is there a case of Sir Keir not quite getting through to the electorate, or is your perception different?
I mean, I think we're in a situation where, quite understandably, the news is dominated by exactly what will be happening with restrictions. I mean, clearly we've had big announcements today, and so there was a lot of focus on that. But I do think that actually a lot of what Keir said is quite kind of slow burn, I suppose I would call it, because it's about us really facing up to a situation where, unfortunately, we were lacking in resilience before we entered this crisis. I mean, unfortunately, I think most of us would acknowledge that if we look at the level of vacancies in social care, for example. We look at, the fact a quarter of UK families didn't even have £100 in the bank when this crisis started. There were those long-term problems there. And Keir was saying, look, we've got to face up to these for the future. We've got to deal with those weaknesses. And I think that's an argument that will apply, really for a very long time. And then I think also that idea that, we've had that national spirit on display during this crisis. Let's try and make sure there are ways for people to build into that future, both through that idea about and those proposals around supporting new businesses, but also through the idea of enabling people to invest into the future through that recovery bond approach. I think that is something that hopefully people will be coming back to and thinking, yes, actually this does make sense, even if a lot of the focus right now is on those immediate discussions about the restrictions.
Understood. Just a slightly changing tack, Anneliese. When, as I say, I spent a lot of time up in Aberdeenshire, similarly in the countryside, sort of up on Donside. And when I was growing up, I was astonished at the Labour Party were the dominant force in Scottish politics. They used to weigh votes rather than count them. The old joke used to be, and I just am astonished at at how the sort of Labour Party has fallen away in Scotland. I mean, what are the ideas to re-energise Scottish Labour, perhaps for the May Scottish Parliament elections, but also thereafter? Because I just sort of sense that they seem to have lost their way up in Scotland.
Well, I think there's no question, but that the Scottish Labour Party has had a very difficult period over recent years. I think there's no question about that. In fact, we have a leadership election going on right now. I'm very excited about that, because actually I think both candidates really have a lot of vision and a lot of power behind them to take things in a very different direction. And certainly I feel that the current shadow cabinet are absolutely determined to be very, very active in Scotland, as indeed right across the UK, of course, as you would expect. It's something that I hold very dear personally. Obviously from an economic point of view, I think it's important that, well, above all, that the UK and particularly obviously that Scotland stays together and that we are better together. But it's also an emotional issue, I think, for me as well. And sometimes we haven't done as good a job at conveying that we are talking about a shared history, a shared future that we need to build. And I think actually Scottish Labour has a lot to say around that, because so often, and I find it so frustrating from an economic point of view, actually, that you'll just have this sterile argument. I was up in Scotland last summer, obviously the International Festival in Edinburgh, the biggest arts festival in the world, absolutely critical that we can build that back for the future. And yet we seem to have the responsibility around that just being kind of passed between, Westminster and Holyrood. And, there's a big argument when I was there about whose responsibility it was that arts funding hadn't been getting through where it was needed. I think Scottish Labour can cut through that and say, look, let's just stop having this argument between, you know, Westminster and Holyrood. Let's get it sorted out so that Scottish businesses can get that support that they need, and that we can move forward and kind of get beyond the Barney, as I put it. So I think there are opportunities there, but we'll have to seize them.
Lovely stuff. And just before we go to the Q&A, just a question I like to ask people, and that is, in 1979, Ian Jury and the Blockheads released a wonderful track called Reasons to be Cheerful, Part 3. What are the reasons to be cheerful that people aren't talking about? You know, what are we missing that make you feel cheerful?
I would say there are many reasons to be cheerful. And I think that when we look back on this period, I hope we won't at any point downplay what we have achieved. And it's obvious it's been a terrible period, and we're still in an awful period, and our hospitals have more people in their intensive care units than ever before from COVID, and it's going to be very, very difficult for them to recover. We've been through a horrendous time for so many. Obviously, so many people lost their jobs, but at the same time, I think we've seen our communities coming together to protect the vulnerable in a way that, you know, I haven't seen actually in my lifetime. The kind of community activity, delivering meals, looking out for older people, you know, really pulling together, which has been very, very moving actually. And I would say, you know, business has played a big role in that. You know, just about everywhere that I go, I find out about what different businesses have done to support that. We should be really proud of that. I think we should be incredibly proud of our scientists and what they've managed with the support of huge numbers of others. I mean, just down the road from me is the centre that created that Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. And of course it was the scientists, but it was also all the nurses who worked through weekends. It was the trial participants, it was the security guards and the cleaners who managed to get us to that position. And then I suppose just the final reason to be cheerful and to be ambitious is that on, you know, one of the biggest challenges, I think, for our economy. In fact, the biggest challenge, of course, is that transition towards net zero. We've known that that's the biggest threat to our economy since the time of Stern's really influential report. And when I talk to businesses and indeed to all of their workers and to people in general, I think there's a real passion and determination to face up to that challenge now that maybe wasn't present at all to the same degree before. You know, we know that we can achieve a huge amount when we work together now, perhaps to a greater extent than we might have thought before. So 3 big reasons to be cheerful there, hopefully.
Lovely, 3 big reasons. Excellent. Thank you. We'll move to Q&A now. We've had a marvelous response on the Q&A side. I just wanted to start off with Peter. Peter is saying, with continued advances in online digital businesses, as Chancellor, what fiscal policy changes might you apply to the physical economy versus the digital one?
Well, I think this is a really important question. And to me, at the root of it is how we can really promote innovation for the future and through that value creation, but make sure that we also don't see any kind of a race to the bottom. And I think we have been, you know, in some parts of our economy tilting towards arguably the latter more than we should have been. I think we had, you know, a very interesting judgment, obviously, in the courts recently around whether we had effectively disguised self-employment within one firm. Interesting judgment there. I think it's going to be very important, actually, for government to look at this very closely for the future and make sure that we don't see a situation where actually effectively business models aren't necessarily promoting value creation and innovation. Instead, they're actually potentially creating a more kind of monopolistic or monopsonistic situation where they're the buyer of labour. So I think that does need to change for the future. We've got a window of opportunity really to look at this very, very carefully. I think the tax system is going to be relevant to this because of that big gulf, especially with the business rates regime having such a strong impact on businesses based in bricks and mortar compared to those businesses that are much more substantially based just on clicks rather than on bricks. You know, this does need to be looked at carefully. I would say also, finally, you know, something that I've worked on for a very long time, we need to have a level playing field for our companies when it comes to all those issues around profit shifting as well. I mean, we've seen, some positive developments coming from the OECD, but we do need to see more action to tackle that, because I think otherwise it's so difficult for a lot of SMEs to be getting that foothold that they need when there is this unlevel playing field taxation wise.
Lovely, thank you, Anneliese. We've got a large number of questions, so if I could ask you to keep the answers pithy, I'd be grateful. Not that I didn't enjoy the answer to that last question. A question from Hamish. This will amuse you. If you were the Chancellor next week, how much would you increase basic rate of tax and/or VAT, and how long would those increases last before being reduced back to normal levels? I'm sure you'd be delighted to comment on that.
Well, actually, Hamish, I can say it in one sentence, which is that I wouldn't be increasing them now for the reasons that I set out before, because I think now we've got to focus on building confidence. UK's had the worst economic crisis of any major economy, of any in the G7. I don't think that we should be changing that taxation system so fundamentally right now.
Lovely. Next one is from Nick by email. Tax is too complex. What's wrong with a flat tax?
Oh, well, I would agree that tax is too complex, no question about that, particularly when we see the huge number of reliefs that we have in the UK system, low level of scrutiny of them, and the many loopholes that come out of that process. I think there are many reforms that can be made actually to enable the Office for Tax Simplification to do its job more effectively. It's something that I'm very interested in. Other reforms that we can have to make the tax system much more accountable, to have much more scrutiny of it. I have to say, flat taxes generally, I mean, they do have that regressive impact. And I think that the basic question of fairness of the tax system is one that lots of people are concerned about. Opinion polls consistently show that people feel that there should be a progressive tax system for those who have the very broadest shoulders, should be in a position to provide more into the system. And I think a flat tax, it does go against that very basic principle. So I'm afraid I'm not a big fan of them, but I am a big fan of simplification.
Lovely, thank you. A question from James. Build more houses is used before every election, but the CPS found that in net terms, every house built for over 20 years went to a landlord. Is there anything that you would do to try to solve that issue?
Well, I'm going to try and answer this briefly as per your injunction, Alistair. I mean, I think there is a lot that needs to be done. I think that the planning system currently is imbalanced. It leads to a situation where viability, for example, is pretty much a lot of the time that judgment is in the hands of the developer rather than having any independence around the situation. That means it's really hard then to impose conditions around genuine affordability, around provision of social homes, for example, which are still very, very much needed. So I do think there's a lot more that can be done so that the new homes that we need to see coming on stream, both are environmentally friendly. Of course, we need to tune up the regulations really strongly in that regard, rather than be going backwards as we have been over recent years. But we also then need to see that genuine affordability in the provision of new homes.
Thank you, Anneliese. A question here from Steve. Are the problems in the music industry in Europe not down to the EU allowing individual members to set their own rules rather than anything the UK has done?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting question, and I have discussed this at length with a number of individuals in the industry. I'm not going to say that the process has been perfect on, both sides. It certainly hasn't been, and, arguably it would be, really encouraging if we saw a more joined up approach. But equally, we do feel that there were many opportunities, unfortunately, that were missed on the UK side to get us to a better position. And ultimately, music and the creative industries are incredibly important for the UK economy. We've ended up with I would say it's a farcical situation, but actually there's nothing to laugh about with it when it's so critical to our economy, where you have, a lot of UK industry having to have separate permits, this kind of thing, huge amount of bureaucracy created by this. This really shouldn't be the way that such an important industry for the UK should be treated.
Lovely. We've got a question from John. The UK government has announced a wholesale review of the business rating system, including a revaluation on the 1st of April 2021, consideration of an online services tax, and a proposal to replace rates with capital gains tax on the value of premises. What is the Labour Party policy on reforming business rates?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say we've not seen any of those concrete details. And certainly, although that business rates review is being described as a fundamental one, it's not clear that it really will be fundamental enough. Currently, the system arguably disincentivizes different forms of investment, but it also doesn't provide the kind of really stable income stream that we need to see for local authorities, where we've ended up with a situation where, you know, they're very much dependent on business rates and council tax and other highly imperfect tax, to put it very, very mildly. And that is making it very, very difficult for them to wash their faces in terms of, you know, very basic services. And actually, you know, that has an impact on business as it does on the rest of society. So we need to have a more fundamental review, I would argue. We've seen quite a lot of fiddling around. I think that well, we do need to see a continued business rates holiday, but actually I think that just reflects the fact that this tax is just simply not working in the way that it's designed currently. We really need to see genuinely fundamental reform, but it should be taking place alongside all those issues with council tax that I mentioned as well. You know, we should look at local taxation across the piece, I think, when we have that proper review.
Thank you. Got a question from Will. What might you do to encourage your fellow Scottish MPs with English constituencies in order to best support the union?
Oh, well, that's an interesting question, Will. I mean, we recently actually brought a number of us together for a Burns supper. I have to say it was a rather pale imitation of the usual and proper event, because obviously it was all through Zoom, as these events have to be at the moment. But, you know, I think for me, the most important thing is having that genuine connection with what's going on in Scotland. I mean, obviously, particularly for me and my position with those businesses, with trade unions, with the other organisations in Scotland, working very, very closely with Jackie Bailey, who's the finance lead for the Scottish Labour MSPs, who's, you know, brilliantly been exposing that many of the issues, in fact, around support for businesses during this period. So I think it's having that close working is going to be very important for the future, as well as, of course, right across the UK, where we need to show that we can join all of this up.
Anneliese, you'll laugh because the next two questions are in relation to the books behind you on your bookshelf. And the first one of these two is from Giles. I see from your bookshelf that David Goodhart's Head, Hand and Heart is absent. Do you agree that the value or worth pendulum has swung too far towards the head over the hand and the heart in recent years?
Oh, well, that's a very interesting question, and I do find that Goodhart's got a lot of very interesting things to say. I have to say that I didn't realise that my reading choices would be so interesting. It literally is just a background. You should see the state of my bookshelf downstairs, where there's kids' books everywhere that have completely taken over, and it's a complete mess. There are some books actually here that Private Eye didn't pick out when they were commenting on what ended up there, which is purely by random. But has there been too far a shift in that direction? Actually, you know, it's interesting. I thought, I'm sure that many people on this call will have heard Mark Carney's Wreath lecture, where he was looking at this question and, you know, whether we've gone kind of in the wrong direction on it. I mean, I do think, however, you know, measurement is a helpful principle, and monetization can so often help us with measurement, and we do need to decide where we're going to allocate resources. So I don't think we should go too far on this. And actually, you know, just this afternoon I was present at a session with Professor Dasgupta, who's done a really interesting review around natural capital. I think those kind of heuristics can help, but they only help to the extent that we also recognize that there are other fundamental values, of course, that we can't necessarily monetize, that there are absolutes that we shouldn't be going against. So yes, I probably need to read that book actually to get into this even more and understand what Goodhart's argument is around that.
I must do that as well. And the second one about your bookshelf is from another Peter. I note the book, The British Working Classes, behind your left shoulder. How does Labour believe it will win back the trust of this group, given that Jeremy Corbyn clearly lost their support?
Well, actually, it's fascinating because I love that book, and there's a new edition. In fact, maybe I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but anyway, I've had a bit of contact with some of those involved with it, which has been rather nice actually, that they spotted it on there and then got in contact with me. But obviously, it's really a serious question, because Labour does need to build back up that support and that trust right across the country and across different communities. And I would say that I think this is a very kind of divergent picture, actually. You know, we see that there have been different developments in different parts of the country. And I think that the response to this has to be Labour having that very open conversation. You know, we have a slogan in my local Labour Party that's literally stuck on the wall, and it says, the more people we talk with, the more people will vote for us. And somebody once said to me, oh, yes, that's right. The more people we talk to, the more people will vote for us. No, 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 no. It's the more people we talk with, where we seek to understand people's concerns, make sure that they're taken up and then reflected in what we're setting out as policy. That's when I think, hopefully, Labour will be able to win back people's trust, and where we can hopefully be in that situation to deliver change.
Question from Shazad. Will Labour move to the centre-left to protect the City of London, its talent, and promote the city's institutions?
Well, actually, I would say we're in a situation right now where, in general, financial and related professional services, you know, in many cases, they have been buffeted, of course, by that Brexit process, and we still don't have that agreement. And I suppose I would say that this is a question that's much bigger than just the city. I mean, it really is about those jobs right across the UK. And actually, most of them are not in London. They are elsewhere. You know, some of them on the south coast, many of them in the central belt of Scotland, many of them in Yorkshire and other places. That's where a lot of the employment in this sector lies. And I think it's very important that we see the employment potential they're protected. I think that we need to show also that we have, you know, a really robust legal system. I think that the trust in the ability to conclude a contract in the UK and have that held to is very, very important. You know, I was quite disturbed by some of what happened around, you know, commitments, trade agreements, and this kind of thing during the Brexit negotiation process. You know, whether that would damage that reputation. We've got to buttress that reputation, I think, for the future, so that we can have really those that employment potential in the decades to come.
Lovely, thank you, Anneliese. And just to squeeze one more in, and that's from Claire Marie. Claire Marie is asking, what are Labour's plans and commitment to help improve the outcomes for women and girls across the UK, which have been so dramatically impacted by COVID?
Well, it's a really critical question that Claire Marie has raised. And in fact, the really concentrated impact of particularly unemployment, but also who has been furloughed during this process really has been meted on women, a lot of it. And of course, it's very difficult for many women to access some of the new jobs when they are being created. You know, if you look at, for example, the growth in employment in logistics that we've seen through this crisis, deliveries, etc., you know, quite often that's tied to an expectation around flexibility, which is completely impossible for many of those with caring responsibilities to meet. I mean, I do think that there are a number of labour market changes that need to take place. You know, we've said that fire and rehire should not be taking place, where we've got situations like, you know, people one day being told, well, you have to reapply for your job, and to get that job, you must show you can be fully flexible. You know, that really is not going to work for many women. We do think we need to see that gender pay reporting coming back very speedily. We think it's quite important, actually, as a metric that we can assess women's position on. But we also need to see actually employment schemes which will support women. We think that's very important. And we've seen, arguably, and you know, I don't want to kind of make a party political point here, but we are really quite concerned about, for example, the Kickstart scheme. You know, it's helping very, very small numbers of those who are becoming unemployed. We need to make sure that those schemes actually are effective, so that women and men, all of those who are becoming unemployed, really get the support that they need, so they can quickly get back into employment, not see the impact on their long-term earnings that longer spells out of the labour market can often provoke.
Wonderful. Anneliese, thank you very much indeed. I've very much enjoyed our conversation. I think from the the chat box and also from the Q&A. I know that others have as well. There's been an enormous number of questions, so it just shows you how interesting, how interested the audience is on the on what you're saying. Could I thank you for joining us tonight, and good luck in your preparations for the 3rd of March, and look forward to welcoming you back on another IoD event before too long.
Lovely, I hope so. Thank you very much indeed, Alistair, and thanks to everyone who's participated. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Anneliese. Bye-bye now. Lovely. Well, look, thank you very much indeed for watching that. Lovely to have you on board. Lovely to see such a number as well. Can I say a little bit about the next event? My next interview is with extraordinary guy, Will Greenwood, MBE. He's the former England rugby captain and World Cup winner. He's a good friend of mine, a really good person. And I'm going to be asking him particularly about leadership in tough times, because he's been through plenty of those. And I think I think you'll be interested as to what he's going to say. So please think up some good questions for Will for 2 weeks' time. And then just there's a couple of other events I just want to talk about. We've got Miles Chelich on the 22nd of March. He's going to talk about the UK, it's from the City UK's point of view about Brexit and free trade agreements and all the rest of that. So I think that'll be worthwhile. We also got Mason Lai's extraordinary and famous International Women's Day celebrations on the 4th of March, which are very worthwhile. And those details of that will be coming up on during the course of the next 24 hours or so. And a quick plug on the 12th of April, Lord Bilimoria, Callum Bilimoria, who many of you know, he's going to be talking to us about the role of the CBI, and I think you'll enjoy that. So just onto the last slide, I just want to talk to you a little bit about the IoD. There is it's an extraordinary fellowship. I think it's absolutely worthwhile joining if you're not yet a member. There are all sorts of resources online, both legal and tax helplines, which are very helpful and for people in going through tough times in their businesses. And also the professional development has just had a big revamp and is really worthwhile. So well worth looking at those, and you get to attend some good events such as this one. I'd like to thank our guest, Anneliese Dodds, for being such a good sport this evening. I think she threw herself into the Q&A very well. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Rathbones. So Emma Watson, thank you very much indeed for introducing Rathbones, and we very much enjoy your support and benefit from that. So thank you very much indeed to Emma and to Rathbones. I'd like to thank the IoD team, Jeremy plus Kirsty, and also Manuela and Sophia for kindly helping put on this event tonight. And last, I'd like to thank you, the audience, for joining us this evening. I think it's been a great fun evening. I've certainly enjoyed it. I hope you have too. Look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you very much indeed. All best to you all.